Good evening. It's good to see everybody. Good to be here with you. I was thinking about a couple of things. Something had me thinking recently about, of course, we didn't have a summer series lesson this past Wednesday because we had VBS. We picked that up again, Lord willing, this coming Wednesday, and I was thinking about it and just thinking it's kind of hard to believe that summer series is basically halfway done. We're a little less than halfway if it works out where Brother Leroy can do his lesson, which would technically be September the 9th, but we're going to hopefully get him where he can deliver that lesson. That would have us with 7 lessons left. But this has been one of my favorite summer series that we've had in a while, just because it's so practical, talking about family in the home. So I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about I'd said this, I don't know, maybe the last year or so, thinking in terms of doing more lessons, dealing with family, and that was part of why we gravitated toward that summer series theme, dealing with the family. But also thinking about, as folks, for some reason, keep reminding me, I have 2 young'uns getting ready to get married in the next several months. The latter part of this year, I'm going to have 2 different ones that are getting hitched. At least that's the plan. So I was thinking about that some more today. It just keeps... It's like, you bump into somebody or you're just talking to somebody and they say, oh, you got 2 getting married soon, don't you? And I say, thank you for reminding me of that, especially for reminding me of my daughter who's about to get married and leave. And so I was thinking about that. I thought I wanted to think in terms of marriage. My children, they don't want to sit down with me for marriage counseling, so while I have them here as a captive audience, I thought we can get our 3 or 4 hours of marriage counseling in tonight. So, that being said, if you want to turn to 1 Corinthians 13, it's not original with me. I've said this a lot before. I was trying to think, might have been Brother Glenn Colley where I first heard it. But it's certainly, if you're thinking, well, I'm not married, maybe have no plans of getting married. This really is advice. I call this lesson great marriage advice. Let me see if I can get it. Oh, it helps if I turn this thing on, doesn't it? Matt, I love this clicker you left up here, but I got spoiled with the one that was always on. And I'm sometimes up here on Sunday or Sunday night, and I'm like, what's wrong with this thing? Got to turn it on. There we go. I call it great marriage advice in a single word. But we could also fill in the blank. This is great interpersonal relationship advice in a single word. Great relationship advice for your brothers and sisters within the church family, the local church body, in a single word. And if you recognize the reference, you know where I'm going with this. That single word is L-O-V-E, love. The King James has it as charity, but we say more familiarly, love. And again, it's not original with me, but I've said before, again, I first heard it, I believe it was from Glenn Colley, but he was talking about it in the context of marriage, and he says, you want to be the best husband? Then love. Like 1 Corinthians 13. You want to be the best wife? Love, like 1 Corinthians 13. You want to be the best parent? Love, like 1 Corinthians 13. You want to be the best brother or sister in the Lord? Love, like 1 Corinthians 13. I mean, just fill in the blank. It is great marriage advice that we're looking at here, not because it's coming from me, because it's not from me. It's from inspiration. It's from the Holy Spirit. He says, this is, of course, Paul is writing 1 Corinthians to, of course, it's, as we often point out, these are letters, epistles. It wasn't like Paul titled it 1 Corinthians. He's writing a letter to them. They had written to him. They had asked some questions. But they also are a congregation that are riddled with division. So he's writing to them and he says, hey, if you've got a congregation that's plagued with some division, factions, the party spirit, he says, here's the solution. Love, like God would have you to love. And that could be for a congregation that's plagued with division. That could be for a home that is plagued with division. That could be a workplace, a school setting, whatever. So we're going to make specific application here because, again, it's just thinking about a lot of things family related. And we're going to make application to marriage, but, again, it could go across the board here. And, let's look at it. I want to approach it this way. Picking up in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1, I'm going to read these verses, and from this point forward, after I read them, I'll reference back to phrases and such, but we won't go back and read every single one as we make these different points, because I think we can group them into 4 kind of categories of what love is, what love does, and especially here in this context of marriage. But when you pick up at verse 1, he says, and really backing up to chapter 12, verse 31, covet earnestly the best gifts, and yet show I unto you a more excellent way. This is a church, a congregation. They were hung up, just a lot of division over spiritual gifts. And when you read, again, context of 1 Corinthians, there were some people that had the gift of speaking in tongues. And that was not gibberish or babbling. That was speaking a language, miraculously speaking flawlessly in a language that they had never studied. Some of them had that ability. Some of them had the ability to interpret a language. So they could hear somebody else speaking. They'd never studied that language, and yet they could flawlessly interpret it into someone else's native language. Some of them had miraculous abilities of laying hands on someone to heal and things like that. And on there were 9 of these gifts. And sometimes, as you can imagine, some people kind of got to thinking like, well, hey, my gift is better than your gift, or more important than your gift, or someone else's gift. And maybe friction started as a result of that. Maybe even somebody feeling like, well, I don't see as much use for my gift, and that might cause them to be a little bit apprehensive and self-conscious about it. Maybe that opens the door for somebody who may be struggling a little bit with pride, and they start saying, well, my gift is more important. If not by words, by actions. But, oh man, particularly the speaking in tongues, they were hung up on that. And so you're going to have Paul at one point, he's going to say to them, I'd rather say 1,000 words in a known language than to speak just a few words in an unknown tongue. He says, you're focusing on the wrong thing here. So that's why he says at the end of chapter 12, you need to covet the best gifts. And he's going to point out at the end of chapter 13 that these miraculous gifts, they're temporary. They're going away. You know what's not going away, he says? Faith, hope, and love. Faith and hope even eventually are going to go away, right? That's kind of the point he's going to make. One day when the Lord returns, there's been judgment. We're living in heaven with the Lord for eternity. Faith is no longer faith because now it's realized. Hope is always looking towards something, but it's now realized in heaven. So even faith and hope in that sense will go away, but love abides forever. And that's verse 13 of the last verse of chapter 13. Now abideth faith, hope, charity, these 3, but the greatest of these is charity. So he says, if I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, verse 1, and have not charity, love, I'm become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. He's referencing several things there in the context of those miraculous gifts. Well, you might have the gift of prophecy, and you could You could preach by inspiration, maybe even tell something that's going to happen in the future that you could only tell by divine inspiration. But if you don't have love, he says, what good is that? You might have all knowledge. Miraculous knowledge was one of those gifts. But if you don't have love, what good is that? Verse 3, though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Then he says this, and these are the verses we're focusing on, these characteristics. Charity or love suffereth long suffering, we would say, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. Beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. And then he's going to point out charity never faileth. Love never fails. Whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. When that which is perfect is come, that which is in part shall be done away. And of course, as we read in verse 13, he's going to say, now abideth faith, hope, and love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. That's the one that will abide. And so if you want to be a better spouse, if you want to be a better person, better citizen, one word, love. Again, thinking about this in terms of the marriage context, love controls how I react. And some of these, again, you'll see more specificity to marriage. Some of these you see it's pretty easy to see a general application across life. Love controls how I react. He says there, verses 4 and 5, that love suffers long and love is not provoked. King James says, is not easily provoked. This is the idea of patience in how I react to someone else. Again, in this context, thinking in terms of a spouse, but it could be someone else as well. Patience is the idea of I'm being fired upon, but I don't necessarily return fire. And that's our instinct, isn't it? I mean, somebody fires on you, you fire back. Somebody hits you, you hit them back. I told this, I ran across it years ago. I use it as an illustration. It's been several years ago, but it certainly is true. There was a little boy, and I don't know, he was kind of, I think the story said he was like 5, 6, 7 years old. And one day he's got this baby sister, and she's just like 1 or 2 years old. And he loves his baby sister, but one day he just yells, and the mom comes running there and says, what's wrong? And baby sister has like a handful of his hair. And I mean, he's just, his head's like leaning over, and he's like, Mom! So she finally pries the baby sister's hands out of his hair, and he is so mad, and he wants to get after her. And the mom says, now, honey, calm down. She is just a baby. She doesn't know better. He accepted that, and Mom walks out of the room, and I mean, just about as soon as she had walked out of the room, she just hears baby sister screaming. Ah! I mean, she's carrying on, and the mom comes running back in the room, and she said, what's going on? And the little fella looked at her and smiled and said, she knows now. That's our instinct, isn't it? I mean, somebody grabs a handful of hair, like, let me show them how it feels. Somebody hits you, hit them back. But love, patience, especially that aspect of love, is getting fired upon, and I don't have to just return fire. Love prevents every single irritation from turning into some major confrontation. And again, that's often the temptation. Somebody does something that, especially a spouse, that irritates me, that aggravates me, and it's tempting to turn that into a big confrontation. The patience aspect of love says, I don't have to do that. I don't have to turn everything into a confrontation, an argument, a fight. We often say, don't sweat the small stuff. Now, I put the disclaimer there in parentheses, provided it really is small stuff. But sometimes something major will go wrong or be done wrong, and we can say, hey, whoa, calm down, don't sweat the small stuff. Well, sometimes our youngins will want to do that. Maybe they've disobeyed, maybe they didn't do what they were supposed to do or did something they knew they weren't supposed to do, and they might be, tempted to say to mom and dad, hey, calm down, don't make such a big deal out of this. Well, it's like, okay, if you did something that you weren't supposed to do or you failed to do something you were supposed to do, I'm sorry, that doesn't fall in this category of let's just don't sweat the small stuff. There are consequences when we do wrong, but a lot of times things are it's not really that big a deal, whether it's between a friend, brothers and sisters, or spouses. And sometimes even in the parent-child relationship, sometimes we can get worked up over something it's not that big a deal. Anger is going to happen. That's inevitable. But we got to make sure we don't let it take control. Ephesians 4:26 and 27, you know the verses, no doubt. Be ye angry and sin not, Paul says by inspiration. Then he says, let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil. He says, look, you're going to get angry. Don't let that get carried away to the point of sin. Don't give place to the devil. It's been said a successful marriage is not two people who never irritate one another. You show me a marriage with two people that say we never irritate one another, and I'll show you two of the biggest liars in the world. I'm sorry, that's just a fact. People are different. Men and women are different. And there's going to be times when we have differences, and there are going to be times when whatever's different with you, I might say, well, that kind of irritates me. And there'll be times when whatever's different with me, somebody else will say, when Chad does that really irritates me. Especially living with someone in a marriage context like that there are going to be things that will irritate me. It's not two people that never irritate each other. It's two people who refuse to let irritation rule them, rule the marriage, rule the relationship, and to let every little irritation turn into, again, a big argument, a confrontation, a blow-up. Sometimes we just need to act like grown-ups, don't we? We can get so bent out of shape over the least little things. Again, understanding there sometimes are bigger things that we're going to sit down, we're going to deal with. But, man, is it not true that a lot of problems, whether you're talking marriage, friends, within a local congregation, whatever, a lot of problems that are just not really that big a deal. They just get blown all out of proportion, and it becomes a big deal. Sometimes we just need to act like grown-ups. I ran across this. Husband and wife were getting ready one morning. He noticed something. She had left an empty coffee cup on the counter instead of putting it in the sink. The horror. So he'd noticed this several times before, and so he just sort of says, and this is kind of one of those things you want to watch out for, but he says, any statement, marriage or any relationship, any statement that begins with you always or you never, watch out. Those are loaded words. So he sees that, and he says to her as she comes walking into the room, you always leave things sitting around. And he's frustrated. He's putting that cup in the sink. You always leave things sitting around. She says, no, I don't. He says, yeah, well, you did it yesterday too. She says, yesterday I picked your shoes up out of the living room. And he says, oh, you want to talk about shoes? You want to talk about shoes? Let me talk about your shoe collection and how I'm always picking up your shoes. And she says, well, it's just like that time last year. And then she starts bringing up something. And next thing you know, they're talking about something that happened, a big argument, a big spat they got into 3 Christmases ago. Because your mom and the problem that she caused, oh, my mom? And it's just a few minutes, and they don't even remember the coffee cup. It ain't a fight about a coffee cup anymore. It's just spiraled out of control. And sometimes that's the way it is. The issue is small, but it just gets all kinds of out of control. Sometimes the reaction drags the entire household down with it. Love suffers long because it knows the difference between a small irritation and a real problem. And it takes wisdom sometimes to know the difference, but we'll be better off for it if we do. There's a verse, Hebrews 10:28, he that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Not every cup that is left out, or sock that is left on the floor, or dirty laundry that's left out of the basket is worthy of dying without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. I mean, sometimes we got to say, all right, is this the hill I want to die on? Or is this really worth that big a deal? Sometimes we just got to act like grown-ups, right? All right, number 2, love controls not just how I react, it controls how I treat my spouse or others, period. So it's how I react, but it's also how I act. And really, I don't know, we could have maybe, in hindsight, I thought, well, maybe I should have put this first because, how we act and then how we react. But either way, you get the idea. Love is kind, Paul says, verses 4 and 5, does not behave rudely. Just be kind. Be nice. How many of our problems in any given relationship would go away if we just be nice? I say it all the time. I know my kids get sick of hearing it, but newsflash, you're going to keep hearing it. I was going to say as long as you're at home, but probably keep on after that. Kindness doesn't cost you a thing. It won't cost you anything. Might cost you just a little bit of effort, gritting your teeth. Might cost you some self-control to stop for a moment and think, is this worth getting into a big argument, a big fuss about? We need to speak to one another with the same courtesy that we show to others. Let your speech be always with grace. Colossians 4:6, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. Don't embarrass, belittle, ridicule, or correct one another in public. I've seen this in a lot of places. I think it was in the, I think every time I remember in the Camp Inagahee staff handbook. Praise, getting it right, Johnny? Praise in public. Praise publicly, correct privately. That's good advice anywhere. There are times when we're going to have to correct. There are times we're going to have to offer some critique, some criticism, and not all criticism is a bad thing. There is such a thing as, we say constructive criticism because it's constructive, it's building up, it's helping. But boy, be careful about that publicly. Sometimes we can fall into that with our spouses especially. Strive not to let familiarity become just an excuse for being harsh toward one another. That can happen easily. And my point here is that we sometimes give strangers more politeness than we do family. We sometimes give strangers like the first fruits, the big portion of our courtesy, politeness, and then we're giving family, and especially our spouses many times, the leftovers. And I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, I stand as one who's been guilty of that. I struggle with that as much as anybody. Something about that, isn't there? And I mean, I've caught myself doing that before. Like somebody's just, maybe comes to the door. You don't know them from Adam. They've inconvenienced you. They've knocked on the door. It could be just a delivery guy or whatever, but you say, oh, thank you very much. Have a good day. Maybe you sit down and your wife brings you a plate, or she made you a sandwich, or brings this or that, and you're like, did you not heat it up? Start maybe saying something that's not very kind. Sometimes we're just giving the leftovers, aren't we? Brother Mosier used to tell us a story, and it stuck with me. A lot of us probably could relate to that. He said they were going to services. He had small children. They were not toddlers, but they weren't teenagers either. Children are perceptive, aren't they? And he said, man, it was just one of those Sunday mornings. They were running late, and they're going, but it was like a spring morning, and it's not really too hot, it's not too cold, the windows are down. And kids are fussing, and he says he kind of cranes his head back and says, well, you kids be quiet, just shut up back there. And he says, about the time he turns around, they're pulling in the church parking lot, and here comes this elderly sister. She's got her windows down. And so he just almost stops mid-sentence, and he goes, hello, sister. And he says from the back seat, I think it was his oldest, that says, Daddy's a hypocrite. And he said, I never forgot it. Sometimes we're fussing at somebody else, and we could just stop mid-sentence for a stranger or somebody that's not that immediate family, and all of a sudden we cut it off, and we're just, everything's perfect, pleasant. Let's watch out for that. Kindness is not just a good trait, it's commanded. Ephesians 4:32, be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. In conflict, when there's a time we enter into conflict, and there'll be times when we disagree, speak truthfully. Speak firmly if it's needed. But we can do that without being cruel. We can be nice, we can be kind, and resist that urge to escalate. I had never run across this before, but I found this preparing for this lesson. Clementine Churchill, Winston Churchill's wife. It was during the darkest days of World War II. Churchill was carrying tremendous pressure, of course, trying to lead the country through that conflict. But that pressure was beginning to affect him greatly. How he treated people and how he led others in his cabinet and such, as we would call it in our country. He had become harsh, sarcastic, overbearing. His wife saw what was happening. She wrote him a private letter. She addressed him in the very beginning, my darling. And then she asked him to forgive her for telling him something that she was certain he needed to know. She graciously told him his treatment of his colleagues was causing them to dislike him, and it was also making them reluctant to offer ideas that very well might be helpful to the safety of the country and getting through this terrible time. But did you notice what she did not do? She did not embarrass him in front of his staff. She didn't mock him. She didn't broadcast his faults to everybody else. She spoke honestly, but she wrapped it in kindness and dignity, all out of love for her husband that wanted to see him succeed. Let me tell you something. I don't even have to like somebody. I can still be nice to them. I could be kind. I should be that way as a Christian. I may not even know somebody, but as a Christian, I ought to be nice to them, be kind. But how much more so to the one who God says two become one. Should I be kind, thoughtful, nice? That is not always easy, but it's always right. Love is not just knowing what needs to be said. It's knowing how to say it, when to say it, and sometimes even where to say it. My spouse, any spouse, should never have to fear having their weakness used as entertainment or weaponized against them. Love is kind at home, first and foremost, but also everywhere. Let's notice the third thing here. Love avoids pride and selfishness. Love does not envy, he goes on to say here, this will be verses 4 and 5 as well, does not parade itself, it's not puffed up, it doesn't seek its own. This is just all dealing with pride. We sometimes say, check your pride at the altar. Focus on others' needs. That's Philippians 2, 3, and 4, as Paul talks about it there. Focus on, especially in the marriage context, your spouse, their needs. don't compete with the one that you promised to complete. Sometimes it becomes, instead of I'm going to complete this person, it becomes I'm going to compete with them. Well, that's not the way it should be. It's not how God intended it to be. When two are one, then when one of them has success, that is the household's success. If my wife is successful, I don't need to be resentful of that. I need to be excited. That's us. That's the household. When one of them is successful, it means both of them are successful. And may we never forget in the marriage context that when it comes to getting tempted to be prideful, selfish, envious, this is a person that could have chosen somebody else. We sometimes forget that, especially as the marriage goes on. She chose me. That man chose you. That woman chose you. That's easy to forget. You chose each other. Appreciate that. Embrace it. Don't spend the marriage trying to remake one another or try to take on one another's roles in the marriage. That's probably another sermon for another day, to talk about the gender roles and family roles within the marriage that God has given us. But be humble enough to acknowledge weaknesses, to apologize when necessary. There are going to be times when we need to apologize, to acknowledge wrong. Be humble enough to do that. When it comes to envy, watch out for some common areas of resentment. Man, we could go on this, but I'm going to move through it quickly because we've got one more point we want to cover. Resenting my spouse's success, resenting my spouse's attention, resenting my spouse's opportunities. Does that happen sometimes in a marriage? It does, sadly. Maybe it's comparing my spouse to someone else's. Why can't you be more like? That's silly. You chose each other. Sometimes it's resenting roles. Maybe it's a stay-at-home mom. And the husband might say to her, well, you don't understand. You get to stay home all day. On another occasion, she might say to him, you don't understand. You get to go to work and escape all this craziness once in a while. There's some truth on both sides. But there's no need to be resentful, right? As I've said before, the fact of the matter is, brother, you would make a lousy woman or wife. And sister, you would make a pitiful man or husband. Don't resent roles, whatever they may be within the marriage. Again, the idea of competing versus celebrating. Sometimes it's keeping score over whose work, stress, and or sacrifice is greater. Well, I obviously put in more work here, and I should be more appreciated because fill in the blank. And sometimes it's even like we start comparing hours or whatever, and it's like, come on. Again, sometimes we just need to act like grown-ups, don't we? That's easy to fall into. Start stacking my stress against your stress, my sacrifices against yours. Marriage is not a husband and wife against each other. It's the husband and wife against whatever comes through that door, as one fellow put it. Whatever life brings into that marriage. They're taking that on together. One person said, I couldn't find a source for this quote. I had it in my notes, some of my marriage notes, but I couldn't find a source for it. But said, hello to selfishness means goodbye to happiness. That's true. We need to listen, value, yield to one another, seek one another's good. That's Paul's point in Ephesians 5:23 and 25, where he says there to the wives, or he says the husband's the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. He's the Savior of the body. He tells the husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church, gave himself for it. Tells the wives to submit to their husbands, respect or reverence him. It's the idea of submitting yourselves to one another. That's what he says there in verse 21 of Ephesians 5. But I read about a husband and wife that maybe you can relate. One of them, the husband, he liked the house cool. The wife was always cold. She just felt like she was always freezing to death. Every evening, the husband would go, he would lower the thermostat. A few minutes later, she would go in there and she would raise it. Then he would lower it again. And you know, before long, that little box on the wall became a nightly battlefield. But one evening, he saw his wife was cold, and he got up, he was going to change the thermostat, he noticed that, and he decided instead he brought her a blanket, and he left the thermostat alone. That happened a few different nights, and next thing you know, a few nights later, it wasn't long before she gets up. You know what she did? She lowered the thermostat, and she got herself a blanket. Isn't it funny how that works sometimes? Neither one suddenly changed their preferences. They just stopped treating every preference like a right that had to be obtained, that had to be fought for. Some marriages, they're not torn apart by great moral crises. They're worn down by folks who are demanding their temperature on the thermostat, or maybe it's their schedule, or maybe it's just their way. I got to have my way. That'll wear it down. When people are always defending their rights, when a couple's always defending their rights, then that marriage is going to spend all its time in court, so to speak. Love avoids pride and selfishness. Then finally, love protects the relationship. It thinks no evil, rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So much more we could say about this, but just notice that there's no running account of every failure or every wrong. There's no weaponizing forgiven mistakes, not constantly bringing up the past that's been forgiven. Believing all things, it doesn't mean being gullible. It doesn't mean you're ignoring sin. It's dealing with that if there's a need, but it's also fair to say it's not just constant suspicion. That's the idea of rejoicing not in iniquity, but rejoicing in the truth. It's not constant suspicion. It's not assuming the worst without evidence. Protect trust. Build one another up with sincere praise and appreciation. That helps to protect the relationship. And then we could say love endures. It remains committed even when marriage becomes difficult. And you know, sometimes protecting love is tough love. So we sometimes use that expression. Sometimes love that protects the relationship is tough love. But biblical love, it's always seeking what is right, what is good, and what is for the other person's benefit. Even if that means some tough love. But love endures. And it says, you know what, I'm here for the long haul. I heard about a lady years ago that somebody asked her and her husband had been married 60 or 70 years. Somebody said, Miss So-and-so, did you ever consider divorce? She said, not once. She paused for a second. She said, murder? Maybe, but never divorce. And that was her humorous way of saying, you know what, we didn't always get along. Life wasn't always peachy. Things weren't always perfect, but we were determined. We're going to stay together. We're not into this thing because love suffers long. It endures. Read about a fella that he was serving as a president of a Bible college, and his wife developed Alzheimer's. It wasn't long before he resigned. People were kind of shocked. You know, maybe you could have got somebody to take care of her. As it turns out, she got to where she was getting worse whenever he would be away, and his position required him to be away some. So he just flatly went in one day and said, I'm resigning. He said, you know what, I made a vow many years ago, in sickness and in health. And there's no better time for me to honor that vow than right now. And so sometimes, you know, anybody can say, I love you, and till death do us part, when there's flowers and candles and everything's just great. But sometimes the clearest I love you is spoken years later, and sometimes it's just spoken right there beside a hospital bed with someone who says, I'm not going to leave your side. I'm with you through it all. But if you want to be a better spouse, I mean, free, great marriage advice. There you go, one word, love. Love like 1 Corinthians 13. You want to be a better person? Love like 1 Corinthians 13. And of course, Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commandments. If we're going to love him, if we're going to call him Lord, we noticed that this morning, Luke 6:46, we got to do what he says do. So the best spouse, the best child, the best parent, the best brother in Christ, or person in general, really, is a Christian. So we extend heaven's invitation. If you're not a Christian, you need to obey the gospel of Christ. You can't be all that God would have you to be if you're not his child. Sometimes we go astray. Sometimes we need strength. We need encouragement. So we extend heaven's invitation. If we can help you in some way to get right with God, to stay right with God, that's why the invitation is extended. Let's look to 1 Corinthians 13 type of love. Let's learn it, and let's put it into practice in our lives. Nowhere more so than following, loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. We can help you with that. Come on, we stand and sing to encourage.